The Red Elephant back again with another video. Today we're going to be looking at the firing of Rex Tillerson from the position of Secretary of State. Um, Truthfully, I saw this coming. I mean, Rex Tillerson and Trump never really meshed. They had some public disputes where Rex Tillerson went against the president in talking about his policy. And obviously, it's not what you can have as Secretary of State. And honestly, I'm not really surprised that Rex Tillerson was fired and promptly, obviously, replaced. Now, I'm not really surprised by this, but let's get into this and let's read what it says. Rex Tillerson out as Trump Secretary of State, replaced by Mike Pompeo, the CIA director. All right. President Trump on Tuesday ousted his Secretary of State Rex W. Tillerson, extending a shakeup of his administration 14 months into his tumultuous presidency and potentially transforming the nation's economic and foreign policy. Yeah, I think that's Trump's plan here to shake up and transform the nation's perceived economic and foreign policy, because Tillerson never really got on board with the whole America First. And, he disputed Trump on a lot of things, so I think I think that the Trump administration is trying to switch it up. Mr. Trump, or President Trump, announced he would replace Mr. Tillerson with Mike Pompeo, the CIA director and former Tea Party congressman, who forged a close relationship with the president and is viewed as being more in sync with Mr. Trump's America's First agenda, America's First credo. Yeah, I would say that's probably correct. He probably is more in line than Rex Tillerson. Let's read on. Mike Tillerson learned he had been fired on Tuesday morning when a top aide showed him a tweet from Mr. Trump announcing the change, according to a senior State Department official. That is great. He found out about it from a tweet, man. Oh my god, he found out about it from a tweet. That's priceless. That is stuff that I guess that would happen in the Trump administration. Alright. But he'd gotten an oblique warning of what was coming the previous Friday from the White House Chief of Staff, John F. Kelly, who called to tell him to cut short a trip to Africa and advised him, "You may get a tweet." Well, General Kelly was correct. He did get a tweet that he did get. And was an abrupt end after months of speculation to a rocky tenure for a former oil executive who never meshed with the president who hired him. Mr. Tillerson clashed repeatedly with the White House staff and broke publicly with Mr. Trump on issues ranging from the dispute between Saudi Arabia and Qatar to the American response to Russian cyber aggression. "We were not really thinking the same," Mr. Trump told reporters at the White House, explaining his decision to replace Mr. Tillerson. Yeah, he's right. They never really did click. Again, Rex Tillerson did break with Trump on a few issues. Here they explain that it's Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and then the American response to Russian cyber aggression. So they're never really in sync. So this is why this firing is not a big surprise to me. Let's read on. He added, "Ready? It was a different mindset and a different thinking. Or really, it was a different mindset and a different thinking." Mr. Trump announced his decision on Twitter. I can't believe he did it on Twitter. Like, he wouldn't even tell the guy first before he tweeted it, but that's President Trump for you, I guess. "Mike Pompeo, director of the CIA, will become our new Secretary of State. He will do a fantastic job. Thank you to Rex Tillerson for his service. Gina Haspel will become the new director of the CIA and the first woman so chosen. Congratulations to all." And I have to point this out in his tweet before I get to anything else. He says Gina Haspel will become the new director of the CIA and the first woman so chosen. Yeah, for everyone who says Trump is a misogynistic pig, how about you take a look at this real quick? He has done a lot for women in his administration. Sarah Huckabee Sanders is his obviously he does all the press briefings. Hope Hicks, who recently just left, she was the head of communications, I believe. So he has women in places in this administration. From what I've read, more so than Obama. All right. But yeah, can't believe he announced it on Twitter. All right, moving on. The move caught even the White House staff by surprise. Just the day before, a White House spokesman berated a reporter for suggesting there was any kind of split between Mr. Tillerson and the White House because of just brought comments on Russian responsibility for a poison attack in Britain. Again, that's what we're going to do. They're going to say there's nothing wrong until they clearly show that there is. But a senior administration official said that Mr. Trump decided to replace Mr. Tillerson now to have a new team in place before upcoming talks with Kim Jong-un, the North Korean leader. He plans to meet by May. The president has also wanted a new chief diplomat for various ongoing trade negotiations. If Trump's going to do it, this is a perfect time to get him appointed, get him in there, give him time to get situated before situated before the big talk with North Korea. I think this is a brilliant move by Trump if he was going to replace Tillerson. Now's the time to do it. And again, we could be on the verge of a trade war, according to some, so it is good to have a new policy who supports his American First agenda on a team now. The White House's purge extended to Mr. Tillerson's inner circle. The Undersecretary of State for Public Affairs, Steve Goldstein, was fired, and the status was unclear. Mr. Tillerson's Chief of Staff, Margaret Petterlin, and his Deputy Chief of Staff, Christine Siccone. Mr. Tillerson, who was at the State Department on Tuesday morning, may speak to staff around 2 p.m. At the CIA, Mr. Pompeo will be replaced by the current Deputy Director, Gina Haspel, who will be the first woman to head the spy agency. Both she and Mr. Pompeo would need confirmation by the Senate to take the positions. Mr. Tillerson has been out of favor with Mr. Trump for months, but he had resisted being pushed out. His distance from Mr. Trump's inner circle was clear last week when the president accepted an invitation to meet with Mr. Kim, to Mr. Tillerson's surprise. Yeah, that is something that the Secretary of State should be aware of beforehand and should not be learning from the press. He should be there. He should know that we are setting up a potential historic meeting with the North Koreans. Excuse me. Mr. Trump said Mr. Pompeo has earned the praise of members in both parties by strengthening our intelligence gathering, modernizing our defense and offensive capabilities, and building close ties with our friends and allies in the international intelligence community. I've gotten to know Mike very well over the past 14 months, and I am confident he is the right person for the job at this critical juncture. The president continued in a written statement distributed by the White House. He will continue our program of restoring America's standing in the world, strengthening our alliances, confronting our adversaries, and seeking the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Again, this is a perfect time to replace him. In a Twitter post, Representative Nancy Pelosi of California, the House Democratic leader, warned that the turnover at the top of the State Department had diminished the United States with foreign leaders. Whenever Secretary Tillerson's successor goes into meetings with foreign leaders, his credibility will be diminished as someone who could be here today and gone tomorrow. You gotta love Pelosi, man. You gotta love Pelosi. Always saying the bullshit. Alright. How much more we got? I didn't know this was this long. Mr. Pompeo, a former congressman, has become a Mr. Trump. Alright. Picking Mr. Haspel to succeed Mr. Pompeo at the CIA. Mr. Trump opted for continuity rather than bringing in an outsider. At one point last fall, Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas, one of the president's closest Republican allies at Capitol Hill. I love Tom Cotton, by the way. Pretty sure he's an Iraq vet. I love the guy. Had been tentatively tapped as the frontrunner to run the agency if Mr. Pompeo moved up, but the idea later faded. Mr. Tillerson, a former chief executive of the oil giant ExxonMobil, had once been viewed as an intriguing, if unorthodox cabinet choice. He had deep experience with Middle Eastern patents and knew President Vladimir Putin of Russia through Exxon's extensive efforts to explore for oil in Russia. But the early enthusiasm for bringing a businessman sensibility to the State Department faded fast as Mr. Tillerson seemed overwhelmed by the diplomatic challenges before him and isolated by career foreign service officers whom he had froze out for most important debates. Moving on, his profound disagreements with the president on policy appeared to be undoing. Mr. Tillerson wanted to remain part of the Paris Climate Accord. Mr. Trump decided to leave it. Mr. Tillerson supported the continuation of the Iran nuclear deal. Mr. Trump loathed the deal as an embarrassment to the United States, which it is, and Mr. Tillerson believed in dialogue to resolve the North Korean nuclear crisis. But Mr. Trump repeatedly threatened military options. Veteran diplomats said they could not remember a time when a president so regularly undermined his Secretary of State so brazenly in the midst of a tense situation. Richard Richard N. Haas, the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, who served many Republican presidents last fall, urged Mr. Tillerson to quit. Rex Tillerson has been dealt a bad hand by the POTUS and has played it badly. Mr. Haas wrote in a post on Twitter using the acronym for President of the United States. For both reasons, he cannot be effective sec state and should resign. Career diplomats who have seen the gravelly voiced Mr. Tillerson, a man of stature, experience, and great wealth, whom they hoped the president would respect and heed, eventually turned against him as he expressed more interest in shrinking the department than expanding American influence. While other cabinet officers made their goal plain, Mr. Tillerson never set clear diplomatic priorities other than to pursue Mr. Trump's slogan of America First, a term he never really defined. On an odd omission, more than 8 months into the job, Mr. Tillerson told employees in September that his top priority was to make the State Department more efficient. Yet he never fully addressed the diplomats should be doing with the greater efficiency. Congress rebelled, declining to endorse his suggested 30% cuts in the State Department's budget, but the message of his tenure seemed clear. At a moment when money was being poured into the Pentagon and intelligence agencies, diplomacy seemed less valued than at any time in recent American history. Can't disagree with that. The turning point for Mr. Tillerson came when NBC News reported that he had called the president a moron, leading him to take the extraordinary step of holding a news conference to affirm his support for Mr. Trump and insist that he had never considered resigning. Personally, I believe he called Trump a moron. I love President Trump. I'm a big supporter, but he shoots himself in the foot a lot. It has to get tiresome. I digress. We move on. During a trip to Beijing in September, Mr. Tillerson told reporters that he already had three lines into North Korean to communication started with the United States. Mr. Trump erupted the next morning and denigrated the effort on Twitter by saying Mr. Tillerson was wasting his time trying to negotiate with Little Rocket Man. Save your energy, Rex, he added. We'll do what has to be done. Mr. Trump later said he wished his Secretary of State were tougher. The Chinese were left to wonder why Mr. Trump sent an emissary whose message the president did not believe in. Part of the reason for Mr. Trump's eruption was that Mr. Tillerson suggested of the secret talks with North Korea and surprised Mr. Moon Jae-in of South Korea, who called the White House to complain, according to people with knowledge of the exchange. That Mr. Tillerson failed to take into account Seoul's possible reaction was one of several embarrassing stumbles arising from his own inexperience and decision to insulate himself from the department's diplomatic course. With this ousting, Mr. Tillerson joins a list of Trump administration appointees who left or have been fired, including the president's first national security advisor, chief of staff, chief strategist, press secretary, 2 White House communication directors, and secretary of health and human services. Mr. Tillerson had some success, including the growing international isolation of North Korea and improvised ties between Saudi Arabia and Iraq, but he is likely to go down as among the least successful Secretary of States in his history, and one big reason was his poor management of his relationship with Mr. Trump. Yeah, it's really hard to be a great Secretary of State when you're clashing with your president. I mean, damn, it's hard to be good. Although Mr. Tillerson spent his first months on the job getting to know Mr. Trump at lunches, dinners, and White House get-togethers, the two never established a comfortable rapport. Once the head of the Boy Scouts of America, Mr. Tillerson was outraged when the president spoke to the Boy Scouts in July and turned into a political event. Mr. Trump declined to denounce the white nationalists who paraded in Charlottesville in August. Mr. Tillerson made it clear that Mr. Trump speaks for himself, not his Secretary of State. The growing distance between the men was clear on display when Mr. Trump tripped to Asia in November when Mr. Tillerson visited the prison that once housed Senator John McCain, a Republican from Arizona who's a frequent critic of the president. But perhaps the most I'm guessing it was in Vietnam, because I'm pretty sure John McCain stayed at the Hanoi Hilton up there. But perhaps the most puzzling part of Mr. Tillerson's tenure was his poor oversight of the State Department. As a former top business executive, his managerial skills were thought to be his chief asset. But he failed to quickly pick a trusted team of leaders, left many critical departments without direction, and all but paralyzed crucial decisions making in the department. Moving on. He approved one global conclave in Washington just 8 days before the event was to start, ensuring that few leaders from around the world were able to attend. He rarely sat for comprehensive briefings with many of his top diplomats and often failed to consult the State Department's experts on countries before visiting. Foreign diplomats, starting with the British and French, said that Mr. Tillerson neither returned phone calls nor, with much advanced warning, set up meetings in his counterparts. Strategic dialogues with many nations, including nuclear powers like Pakistan, were ended without explanation. The State Department's policy-making process developed into conversations between Mr. Tillerson and a lone top aide, neither of whom had much experience or knowledge about many of the countries they discussed. Mr. Tillerson became so isolated that even top administration officials like Mr. Pompeo and allies like Condoleezza Rice, the former Secretary of State whose recommendation was crucial to his selection, had trouble penetrating the phalanx of staff to speak to him directly. The relationship between top management and the bulk of Secretary of Department was toxic, said Ambassador James F. Jeffrey, a former senior diplomat and fellow at the Washington Institute who once worked with Mr. Tillerson. And that was the total mystery because the people at the State Department would work for the devil as if he was advancing America's interests, which Mr. Tillerson was. Alright, so that's basically the whole article. I'm sorry this video is going to be a little bit long. But yeah, basically Rex Tillerson is out. Mike Pompeo is in. Please watch my previous videos. It would really mean a lot. Please comment, like, and please subscribe. I'm trying to grow in subscribers. Please subscribe if you can. I'm going to make a lot of content like this in the future. Thank you guys for watching. Peace out.